who's been traveling around New Jersey for many years with his teams of students and professionals, building green infrastructure and teaching towns and residents about controlling stormwater. He's helped us build rain gardens and hold rain barrel workshops on the Whale Pond Brook Watershed. And now he's here to help you. So without further ado, welcome, Chris.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Faith, can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm not going to waste too much time in talking about who I am and what I do. We're just going to jump right into it. So today we're going to talk about managing stormwater, and we're going to talk about how to use green infrastructure to do that. Green infrastructure is an interesting term. Some people call it green stormwater infrastructure. Some people just call it green infrastructure. So it's either abbreviated as GI or GSI. We tend to use the term green infrastructure here at Rutgers. It's just something we started doing. And since all our publications say GI in it, we're not changing them now. So that's kind of where we are. So green infrastructure is interesting. It's an approach to try to manage stormwater close to where it lands. Okay, so most developments in New Jersey, you have a 50-acre subdivision with 50 homes on it. At the bottom of the hill, they've got a big detention basin. So all the stormwater runs all down through the subdivision, gets to the bottom of the hill, and goes in that detention basin. Well, that's how we used to manage stormwater. The New Jersey DEP's passed new regulations starting in March of 2021. We're going to have to use green infrastructure instead of those big detention basins. So now we're talking about scattering systems throughout the entire development that's going to capture stormwater near the source. So we're off of rooftops, driveways, roadways, and have these systems manage that water. So green infrastructure systems are designed to capture, filter, and absorb stormwater, and we reuse it wherever we can. Okay, so we can talk about how this fits into everything here. So we have the natural water cycle here. Also call this the hydrologic cycle. This is what they teach the kids in New Jersey in third and fourth grade. The snow from the beautiful mountaintops in New Jersey melt and the water rushes down into the prairies where the buffalo roam, and the water goes into the stream, and the water cycle through this beautiful cycle, and water can't be created or destroyed. It's just there, and either it comes down as rain or is runoff or is infiltration or evaporates. So it's in one of these functions, one of these systems, right? We often tell the kids the water that they're drinking are the same water the dinosaurs peed in billions of years ago, right? So now this looks nothing like New Jersey, right? There are some little hills in New Jersey that we tend to call mountains. I live in Hillsborough, and we refer to the Sourland Mountains, which just seems to be a little bump if you go anyplace else in the country. But we really don't have this kind of system here. What we've done over the years, because we're one of the first 13 states and the most densely populated state in the union, we have a lot of impervious surfaces. So we've added roadways and buildings, and an impervious surface is any surface that water doesn't pass through. Okay, so it should be the rooftop of your building. It's not really the rooftop of my environmental science building because it leaks like a sieve, but it should be the rooftop of your building, the roadways, the sidewalks, the parking lots. So as we add development, we increase the amount of runoff. So a natural condition is shown on the picture all the way on the left. A natural forest, about 10% of the annual rainfall will run off out of that forest. We get about 45 inches of rain a year in New Jersey. Climate change continues. We should get up to 48 to 50 inches a year of rain in New Jersey. Over the next 20 or 30 years, it'll increase. When we add single family homes, 1 acre lots, 2 acre lots, you get about 20% runoff. More densely populated homes, quarter acre lots, you get about 30% runoff. And then you get downtown areas like, here in New Brunswick, or the town you live in, you get about 55% runoff because there's really no way for the water to get into the ground. And so now we've kind of created this urban water cycle. So, you still have water being not created or destroyed, just cycled through this. But what happens, you've much less infiltration because water can't get back into the ground. And then we have much more runoff because water can't get back into the ground. We have less evaporation and transpiration because we have less places where water sits on the land and less vegetation. So that becomes a big problem. So what we try to do with green infrastructure is we're trying to restore this natural water cycle. Okay. So we're trying to restore the infiltration components and reduce the runoff components. Okay. So most green infrastructure practices have one or more of these functions. Okay. So it either is designed to infiltrate water, capture the water, and slowly let it back into the ground, to filter the water. So as water's passing through it, it's filtering the water out and it's cleaning the water. It's basically acting like a Brita filter on your faucet, cleaning out the sediment, holding it back. Provides storage, so it's holding the water and for reuse or to let out later slowly over time, so it stores the water. Um, it promotes evaporation, so we have things called blue roofs that we'll talk about today, where water is actually sitting on the roof in these aluminum pans, so it can evaporate back into the atmosphere. And then we have transpiration. So transpiration is just like perspiration. So when we exercise, we perspire, we release water through our pores. Transpiration is plants taking up water and releasing it through its leaves back into the atmosphere. Okay, so it's a process of plants getting water back into the atmosphere. Okay, so these are the green infrastructure practices we'll talk about. And I've got some information on each one of these, so we can actually dive into it a little bit, and then you guys can let me know what you think about it. So, bioretention systems are probably the most popular right now. Bioretention is the technical term, but all these underneath here are considered types of bioretention systems: the rain gardens, the bioswales, the stormwater planters, curb extension, tree filter boxes. Permeable pavements is another one. So we have porous asphalt, impervious concrete, grass pavers, like you can see in a picture on the right, those diamond pavers with the grass growing through. Rainwater harvesting is another green infrastructure practices, mostly providing storage for water so we can reuse it. So we have the simple rain barrel, then we have something more complicated like cisterns. Dry wells, another system where water is getting back into the ground. So instead of having the water being on the surface and let it slowly infiltrate into the ground, we're putting it into a stone basin underground, so it fills the stone up and it goes into the ground that way. And then we've got these rooftop systems, the green roof and the blue roof. So we'll talk about each one of these pretty briefly, and I'll take your questions afterwards. So these are the types of bioretention systems that we have. The bioretention cell, bioretention can be big, it can be small. We've built these systems as big as 1 acre. The whole concept is the water goes in here and slowly percolates into the ground. Rain gardens are typically what we call them because people don't like the term bioretention. It scares people. Rain gardens is a much friendlier term. We have things like bioretention swales or bioswales or vegetated swales. A swale is just a nice word for ditch. It's meant to move water from one location to another. We have planters or stormwater planter boxes. You can see that in the picture there where it's actually built into the sidewalk. So it's basically a rain garden built into the sidewalk. And then we have these things called curb extensions where we're bumping the curb out into the road and capturing the water in the right of way and trying to get the water back in the ground. So let's start with the rain garden. So the idea of the rain garden, it's basically a little pond that you're making. So it winds up filling with water. It gets to be about 3 to 6 inches of water in it. Sometimes we make them as deep as 12 inches. It fills with water, and then that water percolates into the ground. And within 24 to 48 hours, it's dry. So there's no ponding of water, for more than 3 days because that breeds mosquitoes. We can design these things to take road runoff or roof runoff. You can see this one here. There's a curb cut on the road and a little concrete pad to divert water into the garden. That garden bottom is flat, so it fills up uniformly like a bathtub would, and then it slowly percolates into the ground. So there's no water flowing through this. It just fills up and then infiltrates. Okay. You can see a cross section of it here. We have inlet protection on the left. So wherever the water's coming in, we like to armor that. Most of you guys are associated with the public works. The erosive force of water, running water. So we use a lot of riprap, a lot of stone to make sure we don't erode away the garden. We have in here a bioretention soil mix. So a lot of times So I live in Hillsborough, New Jersey, which is in Somerset County. The soil in Hillsborough is pretty lousy, mostly clay and shale, very low infiltration rate. So typically we build a rain garden in Hillsborough, we'll dig down a foot and we'll put in a bioretention soil mix. That bioretention soil mix consists of 70 to 85% coarse sand, so very coarse sand, and then 30 to 15% of compost. And the idea is that infiltrates very quickly. Water leaves the surface, gets into that sand, and over the next couple of days will slowly percolate into the ground. You can see this rain garden here has an underdrain system in it, which is just a perforated pipe. Usually we use 3 to 4 inch perforated PVC pipes surrounded by 3/4 inch clean stone. They call Ashto number 57 stone. And the water will percolate through the soil, eventually get into that stone, get into that pipe, and a day or two after the rain, that pipe will carry to the stream or to a catch basin or away, and that water will be much cleaner because it's been filtered by the rain garden. Okay. There's always a mulch layer in the rain garden. We try to put 2 to 3 inches of mulch down. That really helps with the weeding, so we don't have to weed so much. In this one, it shows an overflow structure. So once the ponding depth gets beyond 6 inches, they'll go into that inlet and they'll be piped away. A lot of times that overflow structure is connected to the underdrain system, and it's not a separate piping system. Okay. This is a great example of one. This is a project that was done in Minnesota, one of the first kind of big projects that were done on a development scale. They wanted to go into this development and put in catch basins and piping to better manage the rainfall. And then they decided, well, instead of doing that, why don't we give the homeowners rain gardens? So they had their choice: easy shrub rain garden, easy lily rain garden, easy wildflower rain garden. So they designed a rain garden to take water from the road through a curb cut, and the water goes into the garden, fills the garden up. And when the garden is filled, the water will continue on its way along the curb to the next garden or to the next inlet. So that's kind of how this works. And so the gardens were given to the homeowners. The homeowners maintain them, just like a homeowner maintains a sidewalk in front of their house. And they have to sign an agreement that they're going to leave it there. And you can see the picture on the bottom is the before picture. The picture on the top is the after picture. You can certainly see the rain garden added value to this house, right? It's certainly made the house look nicer. Now it's a landscaped front lawn. You can also see the picture on top. It's actually taken in the summer, right? The leaves are on the river birches. And they also look like they've done some other work in front of the house where they got rid of those big shrubs and put smaller shrubs in. So this is kind of probably part of a bigger landscape project, but the rain garden itself looks beautiful and kind of can really add value to your home. So this is something we try to tell people and get people to think a little bit about. Okay. Lots of different types of rain gardens. What's nice about the rain garden is you can kind of incorporate to almost any landscaping. The picture on the upper left-hand corner is an island, traffic island at the Subaru dealership or Subaru headquarters when it was in Cherry Hill. The one in the middle, I think, is in Skillman and at the Bloomberg building. They built that there. The one in the upper right is in a courtyard at a school in Homedale. They ripped out the asphalt that was in the courtyard, and they put in 4 rain gardens, and the students helped plant them. Now they have an outdoor classroom there. The one in the center is an abandoned gas station from Camden. So they remediated the gas station and they made it into a rain garden park, and now it's the gateway to the southern ward of Camden. And the one in the middle on the left is the rain garden in front of the library. I think that's up in Livingston, possibly up in North Jersey. And what happens here is this is where my students realize that plants grow, because you can see the signs are hard to read because they put them in when the plants are very small. So this is the one that we built in Camden at that rain garden, the gateway to the southern ward. I like this picture because it shows us getting water from the roadway through the sidewalk through a trench drain. So you can see in the top here, you can see this trench drain here. What's nice about the trench drain is you can lift off those grates. You can clean out that trench pretty easily. Now, we don't do that in Camden because those grates are bolted in pretty good, because we found that when we don't bolt metal in Camden down, gets stolen and recycled. So we had to take specific cautions with that. You can see in the center of the garden, there's a little atrium drain. So when it gets to be above 6 inches of water in there, it goes in that drain and it goes into the underdrain system. It gets carried away. This is one that we had built. What I like about this is that the rain garden is a depression. So it's, has to be dug down 6, 8 inches, 12 inches deep. So what do you do with that soil? The biggest expense with building these systems is excavating the soil and hauling it away, right? So in this case, we use the soil to berm up around the garden and kind of give the surrounding area some topography, so it looks nice, but it's still very functional, and we didn't have to haul all the soil away. So that turns out to be really nice. This one we dug around a school, so this is an existing inlet, okay? And what we had done was we dug 6 inches around the inlet, and now when this garden fills with 6 inches of water, it'll sit in there and slowly percolate into the ground. When you get 7 inches of water, that extra inch of water will go into that inlet, and that'll serve as the overflow. So now water isn't overflowing out of the garden, going across the sidewalk, icing up. It all winds up staying in here, okay? This is one at an individual home. You wouldn't be able to tell it's a rain garden unless you got closer. You could see the depression associated with it. And then this is one taking water from a parking lot, okay? Lots of different plants in here, lots of pollinators, all perennials, so they come back every year. The maintenance on something like this is, well, you have to weed it once you put it in. The first 2 years there's some weeding. Usually after it gets established, the weeding kind of gets knocked back a lot. If you use enough mulch, you don't do too much weeding. The big thing after the first few years, you have to go in and thin it out a little bit and prune it up, because these plants can kind of take over. There's some shrubs in here, some trees in here. So just like any kind of landscape system, you just have to look after and take care of it. When you first build it, usually we have to water it for the first year, even though it's designed to capture stormwater, because usually the plants we put in are very small, so we want them to get established. Once they get established, usually you don't have to water it too much unless there's long periods of drought. Okay, so a bioswale is very similar to a rain garden. Okay, it's a bioretention system, so it has plants in it. It has a specific soil mix in it, but instead of just filling up uniformly like a bathtub, it's actually more of a ditch. So water comes in one side and travels through it. So it's conveying water from one location to another. As it's moving that water, it's filtering it. It's allowing some of it to infiltrate into the ground. And it's cleaning it as it's moving. It's on its way. So like I said, the term swale is just a nice word for ditch, and bio means life. So it's a ditch with life. So it's a planted ditch. So we have lots of different ones. Most of these are along roadsides, right? So the idea is water runs off the road, goes into these. You can see this one here has several different cells separated by sidewalk, and the water's being piped under the sidewalk. So water will move into the first one and convey down, as it's traveling through the system. Here's another one. You can see it has a grate in the bottom cell there, so that's the overflow. So when that gets really deep, it'll overflow into that and go into the next cell. Okay, it's just like another way. And then they also build these just out of grass, right? So it's more of a vegetated grass waterway. Okay, so some issues with this that towns don't like. This one here isn't too bad. If you were texting on your phone, not paying attention, you drove into this, it's a good chance you wouldn't kill yourself, right? Some of these things, when you start putting stone in them, and sometimes we'll put check dams in these, so water goes from one to another and kind of overflows over the check dam, slows the water down. Some of that stuff can be dangerous if someone drifts off the road. So you have to be some careful about that a little bit. But for the most part, these are fairly safe systems. Okay. Stormwater planters. So these are another system that we see a lot in very urban areas. You see a lot of these in Philadelphia and New York. So basically, it's a rain garden built into the sidewalk. And you can see in this picture, it's taking water from the roadway. It's taking water from the sidewalk. This system is open to the bottom, so it's a stone bottom. So it fills up with water and goes into the ground. There's also an underdrain pipe in there, so when you get too much water, that'll take the water away. The only issue that we ever see with this safety issue is that when people are texting and walking, they could fall in these things. So a lot of times you'll see, even though there's a 6-inch curb around it, a lot of times you'll see people put a little 18 or 24-inch high little black metal fence around it, that decorative fence, just to keep people from falling into it. Okay. So you can see it here. This is nice. I like this because it shows the grates on the road, taking the water from the roadway into this. Okay. Here's another picture of that. Okay. Here's a cross section of it. Pretty complex. You can see this is obviously going to cost a lot more than a rain garden because you have a lot of concrete work here, and you're building it, a more manufactured system into the sidewalk. In this one, it's actually taking a downspout all the way up in the right-hand corner. It's coming in and going under the sidewalk and flowing into this. So it's not only taking water from the sidewalk, from the roadway, it's also taking water from the roof. So it can be very functional. So these are curb extensions. We see a lot of these in the cities too. The concept is that water travels from the center of the road where it's the center of the road has a peak on it. Water slides to the curb and travels along the curb until it gets to a catch basin. So here you're actually capturing the water in this garden before it gets into a catch basin. You see this little right here where water's kind of coming in through here, fills this up with water. There's an overflow in here and overflow out into the catch basin down here into the road. There's also an under drain in here connecting to that catch basin. So a lot of these are very urban areas where they have combined sewer overflows to capture the water and keep it out of the combined sewer system. There's other reasons to use these though. One is safety, because you see these people standing on the intersection. In Hoboken, they park right up to the intersection, and it's very hard when you go to cross the road, you actually have to step out from in front of a car into traffic to cross the road and see if anybody's coming, and can be dangerous. So this kind of leaves that view open for drivers. It also narrows the road, so there's a calming effect and slows down traffic in the road. So that becomes really nice. You can see a schematic of it here from an aerial photograph. Okay, and then once again, you can see the cross section, same kind of cross section that we saw before. Okay, the only difference is that this is kicked out into the road, taking up a parking spot. Now, people worry that, okay, well, we don't want to lose a parking spot in our city. Why would we do this? Well, you shouldn't be parking next to at the end of the curb, at the end of the intersection anyway. That should be open anyway. So this is not really taking up a parking spot. It's not really a parking spot here anyway. The other place you could put these is in front of fire hydrants. So what's nice is that if you park in front of a fire hydrant, which you're not supposed to, and there's a fire, they wind up breaking your windows of your car and running the hose through the windows to get access to the fire hydrant. This, you could drag a hose over this. It wouldn't be a big deal. So it wouldn't be a huge problem for the firemen. So it could be a place you could put them in front of the fire hydrant. So it's another thing. So permeable pavement is a very interesting system. It's becoming much more popular in New Jersey. It's been used throughout the country for quite a while. They've been using this down in Maryland for, I think, about 30 years now. So the idea was, and I tell this story all the time, I'm actually starting to believe it, but so the idea was originally the asphalt in this country was a very coarse material, right? So water would pass right through it. So what we did was we compacted the ground, we put the asphalt on top, water went through the asphalt, sat below the asphalt because you couldn't infiltrate into the ground, and then it froze, expanded, contracted, and a pothole was created. So we as engineers said, well, we could fix that. We'll add fine material to the asphalt so water won't pass through it. Okay. And there won't be any more potholes. And that works out really well, right? Most of you guys work for Public Works Department. There's no potholes in your town, right? Okay. So that didn't really work at all. Okay. So water always finds its way. So if we take the problem, we think about it a little differently. So, well, let's let the water go back through the asphalt again, but let's give it a place to go. So porous asphalt is a very coarse asphalt. So water can pass right through it very quickly, but now we put a stone layer underneath it where water can go and sit in the stone and slowly percolate into the ground. Okay. Now, the porous asphalt is softer than regular asphalt. So we usually only use it for parking spaces because when you start turning, you can start ridging it out. So in this case, you can see this picture, the cartways where the cars drive in and out of the parking lot are regular asphalt, and water flows from that regular asphalt onto the porous asphalt and goes into the ground. Now, the porous asphalt's interesting because you can have up to 3 times the drainage area go onto it. So each parking spot is about 20 by 10, about 200 square feet. So you could have 600 feet of regular asphalt flowing onto that parking space, according to New Jersey DEP, and you could have enough stone under there to manage that water. When you start getting more area than that flow onto an individual parking spot, it can clog because you're bringing a lot of material on there that could clog it up. So the maintenance with this is really you have to vacuum this out twice a year. just like you would do a regular street sweeping. Usually the vacuums we use are a little bit different on the porous asphalt though. So there's different types of permeable pavements. Porous asphalt's one of them. There's porous asphalt, there's pervious concrete, and there's permeable pavers. And the last one we call are grass pavers. Okay. So we can see here we've got a nice cross section of it. What's interesting is that stone has a very high porosity. It's about 40% void space, right? So for about every 2.5 gallons of stone, you can store a gallon of water. Okay. So that gives you an idea for every 2.5 feet of stone, you could put in 1 foot of water into it, right? So it can tell you how deep you need to make the stone under the parking lot. Most parking lots only have 6 to 12 inches of stone underneath it. Some will have a lot more. If you begin thinking about some of the development that happens in our area, if we can store the stormwater under the parking lot, that might open up more square footage to build on, right? So we see a lot more of this, I think, as it continues to progress in New Jersey and green infrastructure becomes very important. What's nice about this, it promotes groundwater recharge. It cleans the water because as water is passing through the stone, it gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Once again, like a filter, it reduces the heat island effect. Okay, so regular asphalt gets very hot. If you've ever been on a parking lot at Home Depot at 3 in the afternoon in August to go get something, you can feel the bottom of your feet heating up as you're walking to the store. But because this is porous, air flows through it, it doesn't get as hot. Okay, so that's another great issue with this. The other thing with this is you can salt it. You can't sand it, obviously. You can't put sand or grit on it because it'll clog it, but you can still salt it and melt the snow and ice on it. But it doesn't require a lot of salt because once the water melts, it goes right through the asphalt into the stone layer and makes its way down into the groundwater table. Okay, so you don't have to continually salt it, because once you salt it, it melts, it goes out. And then what happens is you don't have any black ice. So when we plow a parking lot, usually we stack the snow up in a corner. So we got a big pile of snow. The sun comes out, it melts the snow, the water trickles over the asphalt, and at night it flash freezes and you have black ice. Your mother-in-law comes over, she slips, she breaks her hip. Next thing you know, she's living with you for life, and then your quality of life is completely ruined, right? So to avoid that, we use porous asphalt because you don't get any black ice. Water goes right through the asphalt. So it can really be a safety feature too. This is a parking lot we built in Clark at the municipal building. You see the cartways regular asphalt and the parking spots are porous asphalt. It doesn't look much different than regular asphalt. The one thing that you'll notice about it always looks new because it doesn't stain, right? And because there's no water ever sitting on it, right? So it's really not much different. You can paint lines on it, that's fine. If something happens and a piece of it gets clogged, you can dig it out and replace it. It's not a big deal. It kind of functions very similar to regular asphalt. The cost of the material is the same. Regular asphalt costs usually between $2 to $4 a square foot. So this will cost you the same amount of money, but it's more expensive to replace a parking lot with this because now you don't just scrape off the old asphalt and mill it and resurface it. Now you have to dig out all the old asphalt and dig down a foot or so, get rid of the soil and put stone in. So that's where the added expense is. But it's a great material. I'm not sure why every parking lot in New Jersey isn't using this. Now Clark's interesting. Clark has a lot of clay in Clark, so a lot of the water that goes into this parking lot does not infiltrate. There's an under drain system in here that carries the water away, so it'll store the water and then slowly release it back into the stormwater system. So it works a lot like a detention system. Some water does infiltrate, but like I said, it's very high in clay in Clark, so you don't have a lot of that. So pervious concrete's another thing. There are some serious issues that I have with this. Um, it doesn't look like regular concrete. It looks more like a rice cake, very popcorny. Um, we had some of this at Rutgers, but Rutgers tends to oversalt their sidewalks. So when you oversalt this, the surface breaks up, turns to dust, and it clogs. So that's the big problem with pervious concrete. The other thing is you need to have somebody who's actually been trained on how to pour this because it's not easy. There's a special talent on how to make this, right? So you do have a certification program on getting trained on how to pour pervious concrete. And then the other issue with pouring concrete is it has to cure for so many days, and that's very dependent on the climate and the weather in your area. But now recently, there's a company in Pennsylvania that is actually making pre-manufactured pervious concrete slabs. So now what you can do is you can dig out the sidewalk, you put down your stone, you can order these slabs. They come in, 5 foot by 10 foot sections or 5 foot by 5 foot sections. So you take it off the back of the truck and you just drop it in like you're putting in paving stones, and because it's been cured in a warehouse, it tends to be a little bit higher quality than stuff that's poured on site. So this is a project we did in Camden. It's holding up pretty well. We're just always nervous about people over salting it. Permeable pavers are great. You don't get as much infiltration with these because water only goes through the pores, through the spaces between the bricks, right? The brick itself isn't permeable, just the spaces between it. Those spaces can clog, so you have to make sure you don't have a lot of uh, area flowing onto this that would have soil on it to clog those spaces. The other issue with this is really expensive, right? So you have to be in a very wealthy community to have a lot of driveways made out of this because it's very very costly. Now this stuff is great. Grass pavers. This is actually called turf stone. This one, they're like 1 foot by 2 foot blocks. They have the diamonds in them, and they're laid down like any kind of block. Underneath there's 6 inches of stone. We filled these with a soil mix and grass. Some people just fill these up with like a little gravel, like red gravel or just regular gravel. And this is a service road behind the Parsippany Troy Hills Public Works building. So this is like the fire road. It used to be just a dirt road. Um, what happened here was that every time it rained, the water from the rooftop would fill this road up, and the water would seep back into the Public Works building and flood out the DPW director's office. So this became the number one problem to fix in town, obviously for the Public Works director. So when we put this in, they got about 6 inches of rain a few weekends later, and not a drop of water went into his office. So now Greg can come out here and he can stand out here. He could smoke and not get his feet wet in the rain, and we even taught him how to pick up his cigarette butts. Well, for the most part. So this is a really nice system. What's nice about this is you can drive a fire truck on this. It's very, very strong. Rainwater harvesting systems. Well, this is something that has become more popular in New Jersey. You can see this system here. We have anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 gallon tanks. Most of them are made out of plastic, PVC plastic. Most of these have a first flush diverter on it. You can see that labeled here in the figure. Basically, it's just a pipe. So the first few gallons that comes off the roof goes into that, and that has all the grit and stuff in it. And then the cleaner water goes into the tank. There is sediment that settles out of the tank, so you do have to clean it out once in a while. The only problem with this system is in the winter, you have to winterize it. So you have to clean out the first flush diverter. Sometimes we'll have a filter in here too, to filter the water before it gets to the tank. And then you have to drain the tank or else it becomes one big ice cube. So you have to be able to set this system back up to flow a different place, in December, January, and February. Okay. So the rain barrels are a smaller version of this. Rain barrels are fairly useless thing for stormwater management, but they're fantastic at building environmental stewardship. So people get these barrels, they feel like they're doing their part. Next thing you know, they're trying to build a rain garden in front of their house, putting a green roof on their house, redoing their driveway. So it really can motivate people a lot. And if you start putting several rain barrels together, then you can actually maybe have a significant impact on stormwater management. The big issue with these, though, is mosquitoes. You have to make sure that all the openings are covered with a window screen so that mosquito larvae that can't get in there. And that becomes a very important factor. So these cisterns are much better. The one in the bottom right, we actually built at the Clark Public Works building. So it takes runoff from the rooftop of the Public Works building. They now have a shed next to this, and they can hook up a pump to this. Across the parking lot, they poured a concrete pad that flows to a concrete channel that ultimately drains into a rain garden. The Clark DPW buildings right next to the high school, and Clark does not have a public car wash. So the high school kids do nonprofit car washes a lot. So they use the water from this tank to wash the cars. And all the soapy water goes down the concrete channel and goes into the rain garden. And we had done some experiments here at Rutgers and show the rain garden moves about 85 to 95% of the surfactants, the soapiness of the water, before the water is discharged into the groundwater table. So it becomes a really nice system. And it's great. It's a great educational thing for people pulling up. They get flyers. Welcome to the green car wash. Here's things you could do at home to be more conscientious about water conservation. The one in the bottom left was done at a school down in South Jersey, and they use this to water gardens behind their school. So it's taking roof runoff. But this is also hooked up to the potable water system. So if the tank gets less than a quarter full, the portable system kicks on and fills it back up to a third of the depth. So they always have water to water the gardens. Okay. Now, once again, these are tanks, they're static tanks. So there's not a lot of pressure in these. So if you need to pump water someplace, you need to have a pump. And there are a lot of portable pumps, or here we have one in New Brunswick, a couple tanks, and they actually have a built-in pump in the ground that's there all year long. We use a lot of these for community gardens. This is one in Newark. So they have community gardens on vacant lots. What winds up happening is the water company doesn't want to put a spigot on a vacant lot because no one's going to pay for it. So we harvest rainwater from the adjacent rooftop, and they use that to water the community gardens. If that lot gets developed because it's a vacant lot, we can go back, drain that tank, pick it up, and take it to another vacant lot where there's another community garden. So we try to keep reusing it. Here's one in Patterson. They have these slimline ones that are pretty cool. That holds about 530 gallons. It's only 21 to 24 inches wide, so you can put it on the sidewalk next to a building and still be able to pass by it on the sidewalk. It won't take up too much area. So we use quite a few of these. This is Raritan Community College. They put some of these there to water the landscape. What's interesting about this project is there's internal downspouts in this building, so they had to tap into that system to fill these tanks up. The other thing was that the planner wanted to put the tanks on a roof, and we told him they were going to be too heavy. And he said it wouldn't be a problem. But then he came back a week later after talking to his engineers, and he said, the water's too heavy to put on a roof, which is kind of what we told them. So they put it here. It's really, really a nice system. The other thing that we use a lot of is dry wells. So people like these because they're under the ground. They can still have their lawn. And the idea the roof runoff goes into this pit of stone, and it'll slowly percolate into the ground. So there's dry wells that really have the water go in vertically and into the ground. And then there's these infiltration trenches, very similar, but now water's more longitudinal, right? So it's more horizontal. So it sits in that pipe and percolates into the ground all along that trench. So it's another way of doing it. The last practices I want to talk about are green roofs. So these are often considered the sexiest of all green infrastructure practices. You'll see a presentation in Philadelphia. Someone will click a button, show all the roofs in Philly. They'll click it again, all turn to green roofs. Everybody goes, ooh, ah, wonderful. The problem with the green roof, there's two types. There's extensive and intensive green roofs. The extensive green roof tends to be much less soil depth, only 6 inches, very lightweight, can still weigh as much as 15 pounds per square foot. The intensive green roof, where you have trees and other things growing on the roof, much thicker soil, much heavier. So it's very hard to go into an existing building and put a green roof on it. Your roof may be able to hold the extra weight because it was designed to handle that snow weight, that snow load. But if you have a green roof up there that's 15 pounds per square foot and you get an additional 15 pounds of snow on top of it, there's a good chance that roof is going to drop water or drop the whole roof into your lap when you're working. So be very careful about that. So anytime you're doing a green roof, you really need a structural engineer involved because water is very heavy. And that's part of the other issue too. Now, this only manages about a ½ inch of water per storm, whereas I can design the rain garden to manage up to 3 to 4 inches of rain. So it's not quite as effective. The other thing that's out there is blue roofs. So this is kind of green roofs without the vegetation. So instead, we've got these aluminum trays, and basically they sit on a roof. They fill with water, and over time they evaporate or they slowly drain through a system. So it stores water on the roof. Okay, so if you ask any facilities guys who's in charge of a building, can I store water on the roof? They're going to want to throw you off the roof. So you have to be very careful about this, and you're going to really need someone who's very forward thinking to allow you to do this, I think. We've all been taught that we don't want water on our rooftops under any circumstance. So this is a little bit harder to sell. Okay, one of the last systems are these stormwater wetlands. So this are really beautiful systems, right? So now water's kind of being managed in a much more natural way. The issue with wetlands is there's always standing water in wetlands, so you always have to worry about mosquitoes, okay? But if the wetland's designed properly, it's a living, breathing ecosystem, so there are predators for the mosquitoes, and usually they're not too much of a problem. So that's another thing. The also problem with those stormwater wetlands is you usually need a lot of land to manage water. So you can see the size of this and the scope of the size of the people compared to the wetland. Really nice systems. Not very practical in a lot of places in New Jersey because we don't have this kind of land. And here's a schematic of one from New Jersey DEP's Best Management Practice Manual. So New Jersey DEP does have a stormwater best management practice manual. It talks about all these practices, how to specifically design them, what some of the criteria are. So that's kind of a great place to go look for information. I think I have everybody's email address. I'm going to email you all a certificate for participating in this for an hour so you can get your CEU credits. And then I'll email you some links to some of the manuals that are out there. Rutgers has a green infrastructure guidance manual that you can look at. So the idea with this is the inflow is all the way on the left. The water comes in. There's a sediment forebay. Now, why do we do that? So we're trying to capture the sediment in that area because it's a lot easier for me to get a backhoe in there with an extender hoe on it and clean that out as opposed to trying to clean the entire wetland out, right? So if I've got to go and clean that out every couple of years, it saves me from having to rebuild this wetland every couple of years. So what's nice about the wetland, you have a ponding area, so there's always standing water in there, usually about 3 feet of water, so the minnows can live and feed on the mosquitoes. And then you have a low marsh and a high marsh. So as the water comes in from the storms, they start filling up the low marsh, then they eventually fill up the high marsh. And you can see 6 to 18 inches of water in the low marsh and 6 inches of water in the high marsh. And then there's vegetation in there. Then you have a dam, some sort of embankment. Usually that embankment doesn't have any trees on it, very little vegetation on it, mostly turf grass. Because we're often worried about tree roots ruining the integrity of the dam and breaking it up and causing it to fail. And in the outfall system, inside the wetland, there's usually a concrete riser system. So water fills up to a certain height and will go out through this concrete box, fall into the box, and go out a pipe through the outfall. There's 2 other systems that we should talk about, and these are really systems we're going to see a lot of in New Jersey as the new stormwater regulations go into effect. And one is these infiltration systems. So, and they're small scale infiltration system. The reason they say small scale is because all the new practices that will be built after March of 2021, the maximum drainage area to a practice will be 2.5 acres. So if you have a 50-acre subdivision, you need to have at least 10 practices throughout the subdivision to treat that water. Okay, you're not going to be able to just have that one big basin again. So, 2.5 acres would go to this. That's what they call it, a small scale infiltration system. So it ponds up, very high permeability. So you can see here, there's 6 inches of sand. Water goes in here, sits on top of the sand, and slowly percolates into the ground. The big problem that we have with these, and you'll see in this picture, you have seasonal high water table. And it needs to be, the bottom of this needs to be 2 feet above the seasonal high water table. Most of these systems fail because people don't accurately identify the seasonal high water table, and they dig these down into that area. So in wet periods like now, the groundwater table rises and the water has no place to infiltrate. And then you see cattails growing in these, and that becomes a big problem. So whenever you see cattails growing in any type of infiltration system, it's not working properly because cattails need standing water. So that's another thing. So they also incorporate these into the detention basins. So they call these extended detention basins. So instead, they have an infiltration trench in the bottom. Once again, the forebay to settle out the sediment. Then this whole basin controls the water volume. Okay, and then the infiltration trench infiltrates the first 2 or 3 inches of rainfall. Okay. And you can see the cross section of it here. Okay. And this is what I was talking about with the riser system. Usually it's some sort of concrete system where it has holes in the side. So as the water gets deeper, it starts dumping into this, has a grate on top, and goes all the way out through the bottom. You guys all seen those in your town, I'm sure. The last system is a sand filter. it's interesting because the sand filter actually has vegetation on the surface, right? So it has sand, it has some good soil, has some topsoil layer with turf on it, usually turf on it. Once again, it has a pre-treatment area. Stuff settles out here, flows into here, and goes into the system and percolates through here. Now, the sand filter was originally designed for wastewater treatment, and it's a great way to filter out pollutants. But in a wastewater treatment system, they have a water system underneath where they can back flush it. So whether you're dealing with a sand filter or an infiltration system, a lot of times water is going to go in there and sit on the surface, create this hard crud, and water's not going to be able to get through it. So you have to go in there and manually rake that out and break that up to make it effective. Okay. This isn't so bad because you have some soil on top here and grass on top. So that helps open that up a little bit. But once again, this you may have to come in here periodically and aerate this soil so that water can get back into that system. Okay. And here's a cross section of it. Okay. Here it is with under drains in it. So water goes through and goes under drains. So you actually can use this in areas that have clay and won't infiltrate into the underlying soil. So it'll go into this under drain system and go out. That's another way of looking at it. So perforated under drains. So that's it. So when these new regulations are finalized after March of 2021, every town has to pass a new stormwater control ordinance. Every town must have all major development, which is development that disturbs more than 1 acre or creates more than a quarter acre of impervious cover, has to satisfy 3 requirements that the state has laid out. One is to remove 80% of the sediment, the total suspended solids, so filter out the water. The second is to promote 100% of your annual average groundwater recharge. So in other words, if that 50-acre farm was recharging 1 million gallons of stormwater a year, after you put the development in, it's got to be recharging 1 million gallons of stormwater a year. And the last one is to control the peak flows from the 2, the 10, the 100-year storm. The 2-year storm is 3.3 inches of rain. The 10-year storm is about 5.2 inches of rain. And 100-year storm is anywhere from 7.8 to 8.8 inches of rain, depending on what county you're in. And that's the amount of rain over 24 hours. Okay, so those have always been the requirements. The only difference with the new regulations is now you have to satisfy those requirements with green infrastructure. And these are probably the 4 practices you're going to see most of. You're going to see pervious pavement, bioretention, infiltration basins, and sand filters. So those you'll see throughout your entire town. Eventually, what's going to wind up happening, I think, is New Jersey will change their MS4 requirements. MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Source System. Every one of your towns has a permit for their storm source system, you know, whether it's the piping, the ditches, anything that conveys stormwater is part of that permit. Eventually, the state, like the estates around us, are going to require you to go in every 5 years. Permit lasts 5 years. You're going to have to go in and retrofit existing development that doesn't have any stormwater management with stormwater practices. So you'll have these green infrastructure practices that you'll have to put in. So they'll be scattered throughout your town, and you as a town will have to maintain them. And you as a town will also have to ensure that anything that is built in your town by developers is being maintained. So your town engineer usually is the stormwater coordinator, and he or she would have to make sure all that stuff's being maintained. So it's not trivial. I'm not sure, you know, when they're going to start requiring us to retrofit existing development. It's on the horizon, though. I only say that because Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Connecticut, they're all doing that already. So I think New Jersey is probably next in line for that. We're probably only 1 lawsuit away from that. So this is my email address, my contact information. Are there any questions? So you could unmute yourself, I think, and ask a question. Unless you could chat, you also chat it in here. I think that's another way of doing it. And I finished 7 minutes early. How about that? Pretty amazing. So nothing. You guys are all good. Still sleeping?
Hey, Chris, I had a quick question.
Sure, Carl.
Interested in the permeable pavement. You mentioned that's good for parking lot, not strong enough to hold up on like an actual road. I'm curious how well they hold up even for just a well traveled parking lot.
Yeah, so the
durable.
permeable pavement, the porous asphalt will last as long as regular asphalt. Okay, so the lifespan is about the same. So it's not like you have to replace it every 2 years. Okay, so most asphalt roadways will last 5 to 10 years. Most towns don't repave until 15 to 20 years. So I mean, just because of funding issues. So this stuff will last pretty much as long as regular asphalt. The only issue though is will it clog? And the stuff infiltrates at 1,000 inches per hour. Water passes through the asphalt, right? So very quickly. So even if 90% of it clogs, it's still 100 inches per hour. So if we get a rainstorm event, Carl, that's more than 100 inches in an hour, we got more things to worry about than the asphalt clogging, right? So we're in trouble, So I think I don't think that's going to be so much of a huge issue, the clogging. And the reason it clogs is because people will put in a parking lot, and the land around the parking lot is not stabilized. So we see this a lot, like they did a porous asphalt parking lot, but they didn't stabilize the lawn next to it, and all the soil from the lawn went on the parking lot, clogged the parking lot up. Now you can restore that. We've power washed them out, we've cleaned them out. It's not a bad thing to do, but that's the main reason that they fail, so to be cleaned out. And you can actually get this material strong enough to carry vehicles on. The pervious concrete is much stronger than the porous asphalt, right? So pervious concrete is pretty much as strong as regular concrete, so that's not a problem. It has the same loading factors. But what they've been doing actually in Seattle's been doing some experiments, because I guess Boeing is out there. And Boeing uses a lot of carbonate metal fibers in their planes. They have all these extra fibers laying around. So they gave them to the University of Seattle, and they were, I guess University of Washington, and they were using it in the porous asphalt to strengthen it, so they can make the asphalt much stronger, so it can hold buses, it can hold trucks, it can hold garbage trucks. So they were making it much stronger. The only problem is Boeing wanted to just dump all this stuff out the university, and they just wanted a little bit to test it, So the carbon fibers work really well, and apparently that stuff's readily available, because there's places that are trying to get rid of it. So that might be the next generation of this porous asphalt as soon as these people work it out. And we try to keep track of that stuff here at Rutgers. We're not doing a lot of that research ourselves, but we're trying to keep track of what's going on and seeing what works. And that's kind of why I say I'm not a big fan of the pervious concrete, because I've seen it fail repeatedly, for two reasons. One is the kids at college, they shuffle their feet when they walk and they break up the surface. And the second reason is they're so paranoid about someone slipping and falling, they don't realize that they don't have to salt it as much. And Rutgers, if one handful of salt is good enough, 20 is much better. So they tend to oversalt here a lot. So that's a big reason for it too. So anything else, guys? Okay, so what I'm going to do, if there's no other questions, Faith has given me a list of everybody who has attended. So hopefully you registered, and I will get you a certificate from Rutgers for the 1 hour contact hour that you can use, to turn in wherever you need to turn it in. I'll also send you links to the DP Best Management Practice Manual, our guidance manual, our website. And if you have any questions about this stuff, you can always send me an email. I do get about 200 emails a day. So I don't get right back to you. I've been doing much better keeping up with it, but if I don't get right back to you, I might have missed your email. Send me another one. It's not a problem. You can't harass me enough. And my phone number is on the website. You go to water.rutgers.edu. You can find my phone number. It'll link you to my office. We'll kick right to my cell phone. So if you have any questions, you can always call me. So another question? Yeah.
Chris, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm the township engineer in Milburn, which is it's a town of 10 square miles. It's pretty much built out.
Yeah.
We have 2 major developments that are coming before our planning board. One of them is already in testimony now. The second one, I think we're going to start hearing testimony in about 2 weeks. I anticipate that both of these are going to be approved prior to the March 2021 deadline.
Yeah.
So at what point, are they going to squeak in under this this deadline where they would have to start putting in, all these green infrastructure things?
Well, so unfortunately it will. The issue though is that the new regulations haven't changed the requirements at all. They still have the same requirements.
They,
Yeah,
they,
but
yeah, they are doing those, you
yeah,
know.
so if you're in a town like Milburn, I'm not sure how you do those requirements without using something like green infrastructure. Are they building big basins to hold the water? I mean, there has to be, you know, so imagine they have to be using some version of this, I think, in their designs. Most of the
Well-
engineers in the urban areas are doing something like this because they love storing water under the parking lot, you know. But a lot of times what they're doing is they're putting in big plastic pipes under the parking lot and storing water under that, instead of letting the water go through the parking lot. So they don't have the porous asphalt. Instead, they're putting pipe under the parking lot in the stone system that infiltrates. So
Well,
it's still an
neither of
infiltration
these-
system, but
Neither of these developments are both on previously developed,
okay.
already totally paved sites.
Yeah, so don't really have to do anything then. Yeah.
So yeah, one of them is doing some underground storage but both of them have parking garages. So they're totally building out the site again.
So here's the deal right now. Is the new stormwater regulations, unfortunately, even the ones that are being finally approved on in March, do not address redevelopment at all.
Okay,
So the Watershed Institute has put together a stormwater control ordinance that does have some information there on how to address redevelopment. I think Mike Bizzarro is going to talk about that at noon for Faith. So we're coming on again at noon to talk about that. But I think what has to happen is you have to change the stormwater control ordinance in a town like Milburn. So when there is redevelopment, you at least make them capture the first inch or two of rain and hold it on site and let it out slowly over time, or infiltrate it if they can. That's the most important thing. I mean, we're not going to be able to. For Milburn, you're not going to be able to capture the 100-year storm. They're just too built out, right? So they're not going to be able to catch 8 inches of rain and hold it, but they can fairly easily capture 1 inch to 2 inches of rain, hold it on site, and let it out 24 to 48 hours after the storm, and help with some of the flooding problems that are occurring in your town.
okay.
So that's fairly easy to do, and you can add that to your ordinance. So your stormwater control ordinance, DEP has put out a sample ordinance that everybody has to adopt by March of 2021. But the Watershed Institute has gone beyond that, and they've got a bunch of nonprofits together, and they looked at other ordinances across the world, and they said, here's a better way to do it. So it's a little bit more stringent than DEP's, but addresses things like redevelopment and like minor development.
Okay.
So right now, you know, if you disturb more than 1 acre, your major development,
Right.
which a lot of towns, people don't disturb 1 acre. So if I have a house and I add a 250 square foot addition on my house, I don't have to do anything. So
Well, we have an ordinance in our town where if you disturb more than 200 or create
Okay.
more than 200 square feet of new impervious, you're putting a dry well in.
yeah, okay.
Now
So
that
so
started
that,
in 2000, and
Yep.
we have more than 3,000 dry wells in the town at this
so
point.
you guys are on the Roadway River. Is that right? Or
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
Cranford has the same ordinance. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and I think that's what the Watershed Institute is trying to promote, is that, you know, if you put any addition on, you do a little bit, do your share, do your part,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I'm sure you've seen over the years, it does not add a lot to the amount of cost.
It doesn't.
It's
Well,
very
try and
insignificant.
convince the residents of that.
Yeah, I
They
mean-
fight us on putting dry wells in because they're spending money and you can't see your benefit from it. It's underground.
Well, that's why we're trying to get people to put rain gardens in too. I mean,
Yeah.
we like those better than dry wells, because now
Yeah,
you're
we have a few of
landscaping.
those.
They look nice, you know.
Yeah.
So a lot of
If
people
they're
like their
done
lawn.
right.
So yeah. So
Okay, thank you, Chris. Very good
Okay.
presentation.
no problem. I'll see some of you guys then again at noon, and hopefully you have a great day and have a great weekend if I don't see you again. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was awesome.
Okay. No problem. Take care.
See you
You
later.
talk really fast too.
That's good. I like it when it's fast. Yeah, it's good. Take care, guys.